everyday experience of living interacted with the divine in all its bodiliness. And being the mother of toddlers is about as bodily as it gets. Feminist theologians have long talked about embodiment, meaning that any theological explanations must account for women's bodies and women's experience, not just be described as male experiences in a society where men were superior and maleness was ascribed to God. Now, when people dismiss this idea, when I bring it up, I remind them that St. Augustine, Christianity's major 4th century theologian, abandoned the mother of his 14-year-old son to become a celibate monk because God called him, and then go on to describe sex with sin. And 13th century Thomas Aquinas, who shaped today's Catholic theology, lived his whole life from the age of 5 in an all-male monastery and perpetuated Aristotle's idea of the female baby being an in utero accident, derailing the original intent, a male, which therefore made women by nature defective and inferior. Now, from these mindsets came their influential theologies about women and bodiliness. Think about it. But this message of embodiment is important to us all, to be completely present in our bodies in relation to other sentient beings and to the planet, to experience ourselves as part of the universe, a product of the universe, joined to the universe in its beauty and pain, to be present in nature, to observe, to stop and look, to wonder, to feel at home, and to return to the soil at death. We are not bodies and souls, the latter the superior spiritual element, always striving for fulfilment and escape somewhere else. This is my concern historically with the use of the word spirituality. If it continues to be draped, however loosely, in ideas of superior or separate experiences dissected from everyday life. Rather than mind spirit as opposed to material bodiliness, science is asking questions today about their integrated relationship and what related consciousness might be. We're learning how amazing the brain is, like trillions of spark plugs with astonishing interconnections. How then does consciousness emerge from the electrochemical process of neurons firing? Is it in the spark plugs, the wiring, groups of spark plugs interacting with other groups? The problem is not just the complexity of the wiring, but more fundamentally, how this activity could possibly result then in subjective states. Scientists wonder if consciousness is a natural biological phenomenon of itself, like photosynthesis or digestion, but how then is that chasm breached between this phenomenon and neurons firing? Others wonder whether the brain is constructing an account of what happens when an object is encountered, and by gradual build-up of memories of similar instances, and holding all this together makes an interpretation, consciousness. And is there a primary consciousness in babies and a higher consciousness in adults based on their ability to recreate past episodes and form future intentions? Scientist Peter Russell brings his scientific expertise into conversations with his theology, suggesting that consciousness has its own reality, something that basically exists in everything, and from which our perceptions and sensory experiences create our own particular world. He calls this consciousness the light of life, which is what he calls God. Thinking science and religion will eventually meet in consciousness discussions. As Bruce Stevens says, these are important advantages in the shift of theological understanding to a more embodied theology. Rather than escape into an interior spirituality, a believer will take seriously the material dimensions of life, and this will lead to a further engagement with the social, economic, political, and historical world. Now, I know nothing about neuroscience, so don't ask me any questions on this. I am strictly a learner, offering you examples of how explanations of our encounter with the sacred can be made from within human experiences, our bodies, rather than ancient dualistic descriptions of different worlds and divided people. If Jesus was around today, I wonder if the theologians would describe him as one whose consciousness was supremely stimulated by what he encountered, including what he experienced as God, rather than worrying in Greek philosophical categories of how he could be fully divine and fully human. Returning to earth and seeing ourselves as undivided human beings brings us closer to the Jewish Jesus. Jesus did not preach about immortal souls, about virgin births, about his divinity. Son of God never meant divine in Jewish circles. Yet this became the focus of Greek-flavoured Christianity. Jesus spoke about humans living the best possible life in God's earthly reign, rather than under the Roman Caesar or under unhelpful Jewish purity laws that were denying full humanity to many people. He reinforced Jewish themes: do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with God, love God and your neighbour, and do unto others as you would want them to do to you. Condemning any insider-outsider purity laws, he talked of inclusiveness. And when the disciples complained that somebody up the road was healing in Jesus' name, someone who hadn't gone to their seminary, he simply said, "He who's against me is not against me, is for me." And so if we're to use the word spiritual today, as so many are, as an inclusive term to move beyond insider-outsider borders of religious belief, it must be used and heard in a way that celebrates human wholeness, not perpetuating divided selves. Recognising the ambiguities of the word, Ursula King suggests that we should ask what spirituality does rather than what it is. Now, this is her definition, and I suggest this as a way to think about the word in use today. Spirituality can be linked to all human experiences, but it has a particularly close connection with the imagination, with human creativity and resourcefulness, with relationships, whether with ourselves, with others, or with a transcendent reality named or unnamed. Spirituality can also be connected with a sense of celebration and joy, with adoration and surrender, with struggle and suffering. Contemporary understandings of spirituality capture the dynamic, transformative quality of spirituality as lived experience, an experience linked to our bodies, to nature, to our relationships to others and to society. It is an experience which seeks the fullness of life, a life of justice and peace, of integrating body, mind and soul. Quite a different understanding from its earlier meaning in Christianity. The key words here for me are lived experience as opposed to a set of beliefs. By experience, I don't just mean personal feelings, but how our encounter with our world has led to critical interpretation, to what we call our life experience. Now, when I was in doctoral studies in another era, to mention one's experience in theological discussions was not on. Traditionally, theology was systematic theology, creating a coherent system about God and God's intentions on the rationale that since we're dealing with revelation, a coherent position could be found. But we're never dealing with pure revelation, as anything claimed as revelation is always interpreted through the knowledge, language and needs of the subjective mind interpreting, and then other theologians interpret those ideas through their psychological, physical and experiential lenses. Nowadays we talk about contextual theology, meaning that anything said about God has to reflect and take account of the context in which it is being said and heard and by whom. As Mahatma Gandhi said, and I love this, "My aim is not to be consistent with my previous statement on a given question, but to be consistent with the truth as it may present itself to me at that given moment. Our own human experiences determine how we interpret God and whether we can believe in a God at all. In our postmodern world, we are being encouraged in all areas of life to listen to our lived experience rather than simply believe what others tell us is the truth. Buddha knew this 2,000 years ago, telling his followers not to believe anything on someone else's authority, including the Buddha. Rather, if we are attracted to an idea, try it out, see if it fits, and if it bears fruit in our lives. Fortunately or unfortunately for many of us, we don't come to life with that blank slate. We've learned our doctrines from childhood and have spent a lifetime trying to make our experiences fit into them if we want to be insiders. It may be easier for our unchurched emerging generations who will come to religious commitment or call themselves spiritual by evaluating their own experiences. Listening to our individual experiences creates major problems for insider-outsider belief systems because all our experiences are different. How can you create a coherent set of beliefs from that? In a group recently, one person insisted that the one thing in life of which she was absolutely certain was God, although she struggled to describe her feeling of certainty. Another one spoke of her compulsion to pursue the God mystery, but without any certainty. Another one voted for logic. Committing to a God idea made more sense than the opposite. And another one clung to one far-off visionary experience in her early life as her evidence for a lifetime. Another one interpreted every beautiful sunset not as a natural occurrence, but as evidence of God. But if Richard Dawkins had been present, that same wonder at nature would have led him to the opposite conclusion. Without trying to cover the history of consciousness in this one lecture, although you probably think I am, William James first broached this quandary in his 1902 classic, The Variety of Religious Experiences, where he defended experience rather than philosophy as the backbone of religion, and pointed out how different psychological needs attract people to different aspects of religion. This new spiritual, not religious generation has taken this message of the priority of experience on board, and they're reading from many life texts, not just sacred scriptures, whether Christian or other. In this age of greater transparency in terms of information access and social media, religious institutions can no longer simply claim superior knowledge or protect its adherents from exposure to other ideas. The spiritual, not religious, are not limited to the stories and doctrines from family and clergy. Their texts include anything and everything that teaches them about living fully, about embodied experience, whether history, literature, politics, science, sociology or psychology. And they are also reading from the Book of Nature and Evolution. As I said at Common Dreams last year, we need to stop feeling guilty about which religious stories to avoid teaching our grandchildren, as if these are the only or the most important ones. Tell your grandchildren the history of the universe, not through war and human inventions, but through the stories of forests, rivers, insects, trees and seasons, and anchor them in this earth, and let their wonder lead to deeper reflection, with you as a midwife, rather than the religious instructor that has a bundle of truth to pass on. And as a wonderful sideline, all you parents and grandchildren, take them to Pete the Sheep. Pete the Sheep, a classic children's book, is opening tomorrow at Monkey Bar Theatre in Sydney, down on Darling Harbour Quarter in the landmark New Children's Theatre. Best thing I've seen in years. That same 5-year-old grandchild who didn't colour in the lines at the beginning of my story had his first religious education class this year at school. The volunteer instructor simply began with a non-negotiable statement: God made the world. As soon as he got home, unprompted I might add by his grandmother, this 5-year-old said to his mother, "She said God made the world, but how do we know that?" In an upcoming book by ethicist Noel Preston, a daughter is asking her dying, lapsed Catholic agnostic father if he wants a priest. He objected strongly, wondering why she asked. The daughter explained that she thought his profound love of nature and way of seeing things was deeply spiritual, to which he replied, "Margot, that's not religion, that's living with the universe." Although it's going to be hard to sell to religious institutions that maintain power and structures by control of what one believes, either explicitly or implicitly, the move from insider-outsider thinking to people without borders needs to move from a priority of belief to a celebration of embodied experiences in all their diversity, both within Christianity and among the religions of the world. A move from focusing on received truth to evolving truths, discovered through lived experience with relationships in society and in the universe. Arising out of the midst of lived experience, King says, spirituality implies the very point of entry into the fullness of life by giving meaning, value and direction to all that humans do and are. Now, this spirituality may or may not include a God. Ethicist Noel Preston, again in a new book he's got, calls spirituality the human quest to live life with meaning and purpose that is linked to a sense of transcendence. Spirituality bespeaks a consciousness that we are part of a reality beyond ourselves. For Preston, this reality includes a divine within everything, but it doesn't have to, he says. We cultivate our spirituality in our inner life as we cultivate, maybe unconsciously, authenticity, integrity, hope and love. And this inner life is not divorced from the world or from the body, but a metaphor for reflecting on our lived experiences embedded in this world, so it is always eco-spirituality. For Don Cupid, the inspiration behind Sea of Faith, spirituality in a post-Christian world is the coming of a time when the sacred world and the ordinary human life world simply coincide, and we say a wholehearted yes to this mortal life. A really truthful love of life combined with a full acceptance of the facts of life would be the highest form of religion if we could achieve it. Life is God. That is it. My time is up. When Kate and I came up with this title half a year ago, I didn't imagine this is what I would say today. I imagined I'd talk about dialogue across and within religions, but the more I thought about religious insider-outsider mentality, it seemed that our tensions lie in belief systems, with the evolution of new or contrary ideas from the old, and the inability of many to see how embedded any of our beliefs are in the cultural and philosophical understandings of their day, rather than in living and evolving experiences and contexts. We need to turn things around so that we look for community as people without borders, not in beliefs that demand insider-outsider defence or doctrines that must forever stay in place, but as human beings with different lived experiences, free of the gradings of good, better and best. Is this possible for churches and religious institutions whose very existence depends on their declared differences, whether theological or liturgical? Now, if you thought I was going to give a detailed instruction as to how to make this happen, you'll be disappointed. But some of the best answers come from leaving hearers with new ideas or reinforced old ones to live the questions themselves. So let me finish with one of my favourite theologians, Frederick Buechner. Maybe it's all utterly meaningless, Maybe it's all unutterably meaningful. If you want to know which, pay attention to what it means to be truly human in a world that half the time we're in love with and half the time scares the hell out of us. Any fiction that helps us pay attention to that is religious fiction. The unexpected sound of your name on somebody's lips, the good dream, the strange coincidence, the moment that brings tears to your eyes, the person who brings life to your life. Even the smallest events hold the greatest clues. Thank you.